Here we go! Welcome back, slot car fans. Salami here with Slater. We're finally going to get our slot car track up off the floor. In order to do that, we're going to build a modular table system. So come along with us and we'll show you how we did it. If you've seen our previous videos, you might recognize this setup, which is about 115 feet of track we have on the floor. But in order to get it up off the floor onto a table, we're going to have to change our venue. More on that later though. Right now, we're going to show you the plan. The tables will be 4 feet wide by 8 feet long. Of course, that's because that's the size that sheeting comes in. And we'll be building 4 of those. And that will allow multiple configurations depending on our track layout. In addition, we'll be building optional table extensions, and these will be able to add to the long side or the short side of a table to give us more room if we need it. More about that later as well. What we've done here is build the first table section on the floor and being very careful to be sure the edges of the sheeting, the top sheeting, is perfectly flush with the frame. This is important because the tables will be butted up next to each other, but even more important is because of the way that the extensions are going to be attached. And we have these temporary blocks on the side all the way around the table, and what these are doing is acting as locators. So essentially what we've done is we turn this table into a jig to build the other 3 tables. So we're going to build our other tables on top of this one upside down. It's going to be nice getting this track up on a table though for several reasons. Some of our club members have trouble getting up and down off the floor, and in a couple of years I can probably include myself in that category. Also, we won't be so restricted as far as track design goes, more specifically the placement of some of the elements. For example, the bank turns, we always kept that up against the wall out of the traffic area because they can get damaged if they're stepped on. And now that people will be walking around the track instead of over it, we can put those anywhere. We had also previously limited the amount of track that we had raised for the very same reasons. We wanted to make sure we didn't have anything like that in a foot traffic area. Now we don't have to worry about that. We're taking the piece of OSB we're going to use for the top for the next table and putting it onto our jig, even though we're not actually going to connect the frame to it at this time, but we're going to build the frame on top of it to be sure that it fits that piece of OSB exactly. What we don't want to do is just build a frame and then throw a piece of sheeting on top and realize that it's a little long or a little short somewhere. Even though it's engineered, it is wood and the size can vary from piece to piece. And here's an example of why you don't trust the stated dimensions of lumber. The 2x4s are 96 inches long, that's 8 feet, and the OSB is labeled as 8 feet long, but it's not. It's actually manufactured a quarter inch short of that, and as a matter of fact, that quarter inch can vary as well. So if we were to use these 2x4s as is and just built a frame real fast and then throw a piece of OSB on top, the sheathing would be shy by anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 inch. And then when we went to put the tables together, we'd end up with a gap in the adjacent tops. One of the benefits of assembling our frame upside down and then flipping it over is that, let's say we got our flat surface here, and these are pieces of our frame. Now when we set them like this, and we screw them together, this is going to be flush on bottom, okay? Top surface, it might not necessarily be, because even though everything is supposedly a 2x4, these dimensions can vary. Depending on when you get your lumber or how old it is and that kind of thing. So just because it's a 2x4 doesn't mean that these are the same. So when you assemble it like this, let's say bottoms are flush, this could be higher than that or vice versa. And then so when you put your sheeting on top, you now have a gap. Here it's not sitting flush, and when you screw it down now it gets wavy. So yeah, when we assemble it, this way we know these are completely flush on the bottom side. We flip it over and we know when we put our sheeting on, we're not going to have any distortions. We check the end pieces to be sure they're perfect length. If we need to, we'll shave off a half a blade or a kerf of a blade to be sure that that fit is exact. We're assembling the frame with 3-inch deck screws, and we accidentally got the ones with the Phillips bits, which suck. Definitely we like to use the ones with the square drive or Torx drive because they stay engaged. You don't have to use so much forward pressure to keep the bit from slipping. We're putting in one cross member across the middle, so essentially we end up with two 4x4 pockets underneath the table. The thickness of our OSB tops is 23/32, which is almost 3/4 of an inch. If you go with something thinner like 1/2 inch or, God forbid, 7/16, you're probably going to want to add more cross bracing, otherwise you can end up with it sagging. And as careful as we are to pick out perfectly straight pieces of lumber, sometimes a piece can develop a bow between the time you buy it and the time you use it. So here we're clamping down the frame and the cross member to be sure they're completely flush before we run the screw. When we put the leg on, we shim it up a little bit with this spacer, and then we take it out after the leg is attached, and then that way we know when we flip the table over and put the top on that that leg is not sticking up above the frame at all. And we're using the same 3-inch deck screws to attach the legs that we used to assemble the frame. We don't need anything beefier than that. This table's not going to have hundreds of pounds on it. We're using 4x4s for the legs. We could have used 2x6s or 2x4s, but then it would probably be a little wobbly and we'd have to add diagonal bracing. This way we don't have to have any bracing. Another advantage to building the frame on top of the sheeting that you're going to use ultimately is that you know you're building it square, or at least you're building it square to the piece of sheeting you're using. We're using 1 1/4 inch drywall screws to secure the top. We're doing that at a 1 foot spacing all the way around the perimeter and then also across the cross member. As mentioned early in the video, at the same time that we're putting this up on a table, we're also changing our venue. Firstly, in our old location, while the track was set up, we couldn't use the space for what it was intended for, which is a theater. Secondly, since we won't be walking over the track, but we have to walk around it, we just won't have enough room. We are going to miss some of the comforts of the old location though, such as the scoring system projected up onto the wall, good lighting, a ceiling, heat, the bar. But what we're going to miss most of all probably is the magical wall full of beer. At this point, we still needed to do some more work on the table, namely putting up retaining walls around the outside, but we decided to take a break and have some fun instead, so we threw together a track real fast so we could play before we get back to work. Notice here that the tabletop is still just bare wood, so we went ahead and put down a fast-growing hydroponic grass seed. It's kind of like a chia seed type thing. Well, think about like a chia pet. Anyway, it was developed by our groundskeeper Carl, so here's Carl to tell us a little bit about it.
A hybrid. This is a cross, bluegrass, Kentucky bluegrass, featherbed bench, and Northern California sensimilla. The amazing stuff about this is that you can play 36 holes on it in the afternoon, take it home and just get stoned to the bejesus belt that night on this stuff. It's a little harsh, but here, cannonball it.
Well, it might be a little harsh, but it sure does grow fast. This is less than a week later, and it looks fantastic. This is one of the optional table extensions, and they are 1 foot wide by either 8 feet long or 4 feet long. That way we have them for either the short edge or the long edge of a table. Going back to the importance of having the sheeting flush with the frame on both the tables and the extension is that when we put these together, we're going to clamp them from underneath. If the top sheeting on either the extension or the table is a little long, that's going to skew our alignment. And if it's a little short, we're going to end up with a gap. Here's an example of where we're using one of these extensions. This table here is sitting this way, so it's 8 feet in this direction. and then 4 this way, and so we're using a 4-foot extension on this edge. The way that we're attaching these is we're just using these quick clamps. They're pretty cheap, like $3 or $4 from Harbor Freight. And we'll just clamp those around the frame of the table and frame of the extension, and a couple of squeezes there. And then the supports, we just cut the tops roughly the same angle, and they're not even attached up there because they're not going anywhere. And then once we make sure that we're nice and flush, level here, we'll just drive 1 screw in to the leg, and 1 on this side, and then we're done. And then, of course, real easy to remove if we want to move the extension somewhere or just take it off altogether. Of course, you could use screws on here too. That'll work also. One thing, though, we're sure not to do, though, is if we do have to move this table, I'm not going to try to lift it by the extension, as the support's only secured down here and not up here, and bad things will happen. Okay, getting serious about the grass here, just for those of you that didn't know we were joking about this being chia pet grass, this is outdoor carpeting. We found a remnant that almost fit this large area that is 12 foot by 9, and the remnant was 12 by 8.5 or something, so it's just a little shy. But we're going to get some more, and once we move these tables, we're going to fit the carpet to each individual table and also fit the extensions. That way the carpet moves with the table. After that, the carpeting won't be so seamless, as in you'll be able to see the seams, but the tables fit together pretty well, so it shouldn't look too bad. For the retaining walls, we're using standard nylon window screen, and these are going to be modular as well, and they're all going to be 4-foot long sections and either 6 inches high or 8 inches high, depending on what part of the track we put this on. The long edge of the screen is straight because we cut it with a straight edge. The short edge, we just hacked it off so it might not be square, so we're using the workbench, the corner of the workbench, to square up our stanchions. And then we're sure to wrap this on at least 2 edges before we staple it. Wrapping the screen around the stanchion should help to distribute the load if something runs into that screen. If we were to have it just stapled on the face edge, it would probably have a tendency to pull through the screen where the staples are. And for a section that we have 6 inches high, for example, the screen is actually 7 inches high. That way we can staple it to the edge of the table as well. And here we're putting up another section next to one that's already been installed. So we'll run the screws in on the adjacent stanchion first, and then make sure to stretch it very tight before we run the other side in. That way we don't have a loose fence or it's not sagging or anything. And again, if we change the configuration of the tables, we can just take these off and put them where we need them. And again, we had left the screen a little long so that we could secure it to the face edge of the table, and that way a car doesn't slip through the bottom.
Sharpen it.
Alright, so we got our catch fencing done. This table here has a little offset, so we put a filler piece in there. This here... We got tall fencing behind the bank turn. What is that, 11 and 12 inches high?
Yeah, we got 12 incher there.
12, and then that's 8. That's 8.
8.
8 along the side. That's open because that's our workstation for now, until we find somewhere else to move it. Unfortunately, still a work in progress. And then this is the this is our desert area.
Yeah, that's Arizona, man.
Our Arizona desert. And of course our racetrack goes around a park. It's a playground. There's no better place for a playground than next to a racetrack. Unfortunately, we did have little casualties.
That's the headstones.
No, it's not a headstone. It's a roadside memorial for, who is this one?
Is that Billy or Sally?
I can't tell. Well, this is little Billy. Yeah, unfortunately, little Billy.
Oh, Susie. It's little Susie's over here.
Right, little Billy ran out into chasing his dog Scraps into the road, and then he got aced.
Don't forget, Susie was chasing her kitty.
Yeah, Mr. Fuzzles.
Susie.
And she got aced too by by a Ferrari.
I was going to say, she got hit by a 599
Right,
going
so-
sideways.
Anyway, we don't mean to offend anybody who lost a Billy or a Susie, okay? So,
Or has a
but
Ferrari.
this is all experimental. So, after all of this video instruction on how we did everything, especially the, what do we call that? The guard, or the catch fencing?
The catch fence, right.
We don't even know if it's going to work.
I have no clue.
We could have one race night and it could be completely destroyed from people accidentally hitting it with their arms or running a 24 scale right through it. We don't even know.
Yeah.
So we'll post an update if it fails. This is trial and error. You're seeing the trial part.
Oh, here's the trial part. We'll post the errors.
Right. Alrighty. Cool. But now, do some no mag racing.
The no mag racing is next.
Here's the plan view of our current setup, and you can see where we use the extensions to give ourselves a little bit more room. It's just a test track, so it's short, maybe 75 feet, but we're just using this to test out the table and also to do some car reviews. When we're done with our testing, then we'll reconfigure the tables and put up our club track, which will be much larger, 120, 125 feet or so. But we'll be sure to put out a video when we do that. Until then, we'll see you next time.